The bathroom smelled like her shea butter and the lavender oil she had been using since college. The light was that particular Saturday morning light, soft, unhurried, coming through the frosted window above the mirror at an angle that usually made her feel like herself. She had spent 40 minutes getting ready. Not for anywhere important. Not for anyone else. For herself. 6 weeks postpartum. Her body still carrying the extraordinary evidence of what it had just done. Grown 2 human beings. Delivered them both. Survived what 14 hours of labor does to a woman's body and spirit. Grace Park had woken up that morning and decided she was going to take 40 minutes. She was going to shower with hot water. She was going to do her edges with the care they deserved. She was going to put on a real dress, the wine-colored one with the wrap waist, and she was going to stand in front of her own mirror and look at herself like a woman who still existed. She had earned that. She had earned far more than that. Her locks were pinned up, the way she wore them on days when she wanted to feel capable. Her skin was glowing. Something about becoming a mother had given her face a fullness, a warmth, a depth she had been quietly studying that morning with something close to wonder. She was still trying to smile when she heard him in the doorway. She turned. She wanted him to see her. She had been wanting him to really see her, the way he used to at the beginning, the way he crossed rooms for her, the way he said her name like it had weight, for longer than she had admitted to herself. She turned from the mirror and looked at her husband with her heart still open and her face still reaching. Minjun stood in the doorway in a pressed shirt, collar straight, arms at his sides. He looked at her the way his mother looked at things she was assessing. His eyes moved across her face, down her body, back up. Slow, deliberate, the way you look at something you are deciding about. The silence lasted for seconds. She counted them without knowing she was counting. And then, in a voice so flat it didn't even have the decency to be cruel. Just clinical, just factual, just his mother's voice living in his mouth, he said. You've changed. And not well. A pause. You're fat, Grace. You're ugly. That, a slight gesture toward her, toward all of her, toward everything she had just sacrificed, is not the woman I married. Get back to yourself. He turned, walked to the sink, washed his hands like the conversation was complete, left the room, his footsteps down the hallway. Then the soft sound of the twins crying from the nursery and the sound of Minjun going to them like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just stood in the doorway and looked at the woman who had spent 6 weeks keeping 2 human beings alive with her own body and told her she was wrong for existing the way she existed. Grace stood at that mirror. She did not move. She stood completely still with the lavender oil still on her fingertips and the wine-colored dress that had felt like reclamation 20 minutes ago, now feeling like evidence of something she didn't have words for yet. She stood at that mirror, and she looked at herself, and she thought, with the specific clarity of a woman whose last soft place has just been touched in the wrong way by the wrong hands. He said it in his mother's voice. And then, not yet, not today, but the seed of it planted right there in that bathroom light. She thought, I have been here before. Not in this bathroom, not with these words, but in this specific experience of being looked at by someone who is supposed to love you and understanding, from the quality of their looking, that they have stopped seeing you and started assessing you. She had been disappearing, slowly, quietly, in a way that looked fine from the outside. And she had not noticed until this moment because she had been too busy surviving to notice what the surviving was costing her. The twins cried louder. Grace squared her shoulders, took one long breath, and went to her sons. She said nothing to Minjun that day. What she did not know, what she would not understand until much later, was that she had not been alone in that bathroom. Not entirely. 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday evening, Minjun had sat in the back of a car with his mother while Grace was inside their home making dinner. Mrs. Park had her hands folded in her lap and her face holding the particular composure of a woman who has been executing plans for so long that execution feels like calm. She had looked at her son and said, She has lost herself. You need to tell her, clearly, before she settles into this version of herself permanently. Minjun had said nothing. His mother had said, If you cannot be direct, I will tell you exactly what to say. He had listened. He had not agreed. He had not disagreed. He had sat in that car and received his mother's words, and 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in a bathroom that smelled like lavender oil, he had opened his mouth and his mother had spoken. Grace did not know this yet. She knew only what she had seen in the mirror. Not her reflection, but the reflection of what she had become inside this marriage. Smaller, more careful, less herself. She would find out the rest. But not today. Today she went to her sons. Before we go 1 second further, if you felt something just now in that bathroom, if you recognized something in the way Grace squared her shoulders and went to her boys without letting herself fall apart, subscribe right now. Turn on every notification. Drop your city and the time in the comments because I want to know who is with me for this story tonight. Only the women who believe Grace deserves everything that is coming to her are going to stay. The ones who think she should have stayed small, they already left. You are still here. So let's go. Grace Williams grew up in Savannah, Georgia, middle daughter, raised by a woman named Loretta who ironed her church clothes on Saturday nights and spoke in a voice that never needed to rise because it had never needed to. Loretta Williams had a quality Grace spent her entire childhood trying to name and finally identified at 31. Her mother took up space without apologizing for it. Not loudly, not theatrically, simply the way a tree takes up space, because it grew there and it belongs. Grace learned. By 32, she had a master's degree in healthcare administration, a corner office at Memorial Hermann, and the kind of career that did not happen by accident. It happened because Grace Williams was the first one in and the last one out, and she brought something to every room she entered that could not be taught. A clarity about what mattered and an absolute unwillingness to be managed by people who understood her less than she understood herself. She wore her locks pinned up during the week. On weekends, she let them fall. She had a best friend named Rochelle, Howard University, freshman year, the kind of friendship that survives cities and marriages and everything in between. She had a mother who called every Sunday and asked questions that were really statements. She had a life that was full and warm and entirely hers. She was not looking for Minjun Park. She met him at a children's hospital fundraiser. Him in a dark suit that fit the way expensive things fit, constructed specifically for the body wearing it. Her in burgundy, she had almost talked herself out of wearing. He was standing near the window with a glass he wasn't drinking from, watching the room the way men watch rooms when they are used to being the most significant thing in them. Their eyes met across 50 feet of Houston ballroom, and he crossed the room in 30 seconds. Not rushing, like he had simply decided. "You're the most interesting person here," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You've spoken to everyone?" "I don't need to." She knew the name. Minjun Park. Park Logistics. $470 million in annual revenue, officially. 3 federal investigations over 8 years, none resulting in charges. A Forbes profile that answered fewer questions than it asked. She shook his hand anyway. "Grace Williams," she said. "You might want to work on your opening line." He almost smiled. It gets better. It did. For a while it did. What Grace could not have known that night was that 2 men in dark coats were sitting in a car in the parking structure 2 levels below, waiting for Minjun to finish his evening so they could continue a conversation that had begun 3 months earlier and would not be finished for another 2 years. She did not know about Song Day 1. She did not know about the debt. She did not know that the man crossing the room toward her was carrying something underneath the composure that he had not yet found a way to put down. She would find out. But not tonight. Tonight he was just the man who listened to her like her words were evidence of something he was trying to understand. Who remembered, 3 weeks later, a cafe in Savannah she had mentioned once in passing. Who looked at her like she was the point of every room she entered. His family was another matter. Mrs. Park, Minjun's mother, a woman from Busan who had spent 50 years developing opinions and approximately 0 interest in softening them, looked at Grace the first time they met the way a jeweler examines a stone she suspects is not genuine. She was never rude. She was more sophisticated than rude. She made comments dressed as concern. About Grace's appearance. About how Korean families operated. About the adjustment that would be required. Grace smiled through every single one. She had been a black woman in America for 32 years. She was fluent in this language. She had survived rooms far less subtle than Mrs. Park's living room with her spine intact. She chose Minjun anyway. Loretta came to Houston before the engagement was announced. She sat across the kitchen table from Minjun Park for 2 hours asking questions that sounded like conversation and were actually examination. At the end of the evening, after Minjun had gone to his car, Loretta said to Grace, "He sees you. I can tell by the way he watches you when he thinks nobody is looking. That is rare. Hold on to that." "I will, Mama." "But baby." Loretta looked at her directly. Make sure he keeps seeing you. Because the world has a way of teaching men to stop looking at what they already have. Grace heard it. She stored it. She did not know yet how precisely it would matter. The wedding was in October. 200 guests. Rochelle's maid of honor speech had half the room crying and the other half laughing too loud. Grace wore her locks crowned with something that was almost a veil, but was really just light. Minjun cried when he saw her come down the aisle. He did not try to stop the tears. She would remember that longer than almost anything else about that day. 18 months into the marriage, the twins arrived. Not planned as twins. Discovered as twins at the 8-week ultrasound when the technician went still and said carefully, "Mrs. Park, I'm seeing two." Grace gripped Minjun's hand so hard he winced. He did not pull away. The pregnancy was hard. High risk by month 4, bed rest by month 6. Her career paused. She told herself every day it was temporary. But there was something else happening during those months that Grace was too tired and too focused on survival to examine. Minjun was present. She would always say that. Even later, even after everything. He came to every appointment. He learned to cook 3 things she craved. But he was also carrying something she could feel and not name. Phone calls that ended when she walked in. A tension in his shoulders that never fully released. A version of his face, in certain moments, that she had not seen before they were married. 3 months into the pregnancy, she came home early from an appointment to find 2 men she had never seen before sitting in her living room. She stood in the doorway of her own home and looked at them. Korean. 50s. Dark coats despite the Houston heat. They sat with the stillness of men who were comfortable being in rooms where they were not supposed to be. They looked at her the way people look at variables they are calculating. Minjun stood immediately. Grace. His voice was controlled in a way that told her everything. These are colleagues. We're finishing a meeting. One of the men nodded at her. The other kept his eyes on Minjun. Of course, Grace said. She smiled. She went to the kitchen. She made tea she did not drink and listened to the murmur of voices she could not quite make out, and felt the specific bone-deep chill of understanding that the person you love has a room in their life that you have not been shown. The men left 20 minutes later. Minjun came to the kitchen. Business, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them named what was sitting in the room between them. Then Grace put her hand on her stomach where the boys were moving and said, "I'm going to lie down." She lay in their bedroom staring at the ceiling, storing everything carefully for a later she could not yet see. Then came the bathroom. The lavender oil. The wine-colored dress. The words delivered in his mother's voice. The door clicking shut. That night, after Minjun was asleep, Grace went back to the bathroom alone. And this time she cried. Not the kind of crying that is clean and resolving. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from 2 years of absorbing comments and swallowing observations and filing things away that should have been spoken aloud. From 2 men in dark coats. From phone calls that ended when she walked in. From his mother's voice finding its way into his mouth. From standing at an altar believing she was fully seen and spending every year since watching herself become slightly less visible. She cried until there was nothing left. Until her eyes were swollen and the floor was cold under her feet and the house was silent. Then she washed her face. She went to the nursery. She stood between Elijah's crib and Noah's crib in the dark and listened to her sons breathe. Her AfroKorean boys. Their father's cheekbones. Her grandmother's eyes. Then she said out loud, to nobody, to herself, to every woman who had ever stood in a room like this at 2 in the morning using her children's breathing as a reason to stay standing. I am still here. She went back to bed. In the morning, she set her alarm for 5 a.m. Right now, before this story goes where it goes, and I promise you it goes somewhere you are absolutely not ready for, subscribe. Turn on every bell. Drop your location and time in the comments. Because what Grace finds next, what has been sitting in plain sight the entire time, will change everything you think you know about this marriage. You did not see this coming. Don't you dare leave before you find out. She got up at 5 a.m. every morning for 2 weeks before she knew why. Coffee. Kitchen table. Dark. Silence that belonged only to her before the day had its hands on her. For a woman who had been giving every hour to something or someone else for 2 years, 50 minutes of silence before dawn was a radical act of reclamation. On the 14th morning, she called Diane Foster at Memorial Hermann. Her voice, when Diane answered, sounded like herself. Fully and completely herself. She had not heard that voice in so long it startled her. A consulting role was waiting. Part-time to start. The door was open. She did not tell Minjun. She held it close, turned it over like something precious she was relearning to trust herself with. She had something entirely hers, and the simple private ownership of it felt like the first real breath she had taken in a year. Her mother arrived from Savannah 10 days later. Loretta came the way she always came, without drama, with food, with the focused stillness that Grace had spent her whole life leaning toward. She took one look at her daughter and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me." So Grace told her. The bathroom, the voice, the two men in the living room, the phone calls that ended. All of it laid out between them like something that needed to be examined in proper light. Loretta was quiet for a long time. "Did he say it like his mama?" she finally asked. Grace didn't answer. Loretta nodded like that was answer enough. "Baby," Loretta said, "you come from women who bent but never broke. But there is a difference, a critical difference, between bending and disappearing. You have been disappearing, slowly, quietly, in a way that looks fine from the outside." She looked at Grace directly. "You are not a woman who disappears, Grace Elaine Williams. Not for love. Not for a man who forgot what he was looking at." Grace put her face in her hands. "Not from weakness. From relief. The devastating relief of being seen accurately after a long season of being invisible." "What do I do?" she asked. "You remember," Loretta said. "That is the whole instruction. Now here is where the story turns." Because 3 days after Loretta arrived, 3 days after Grace had started waking at 5 a.m. and making her private phone calls and quietly beginning to come back to herself, something happened that nobody in this story saw coming. A message arrived on Grace's personal phone, not Minjun's phone, hers, a number she did not recognize. She opened it thinking it was spam. It was not spam. The message contained 4 words and a photograph. The 4 words were, "We know you're watching." The photograph was of Grace, taken 3 days earlier. She was sitting at her kitchen table at 5 a.m. in her robe with her coffee cup, visible through the kitchen window from the street below. Taken from outside, from a car, by the angle of it, while she thought she was alone in the only space that was entirely hers. Song Day One's people had not been waiting for Minjun to handle things. They had been watching Grace. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at that photograph for a very long time. At herself, unknowing, in her own kitchen at 5 in the morning, captured by someone who wanted her to understand that there was no room in her life that was safe from what her husband had brought home. Her hands were completely steady. That was the thing she noticed. Her hands did not shake. Something inside her had already moved beyond the place where fear had access to her hands. She forwarded the message to a number she had quietly saved 3 weeks earlier. A private security contact Rochelle's husband had insisted on giving her after the 2 men in the living room incident, which Grace had mentioned to Rochelle and which Rochelle had not treated casually. Then she made her coffee. She sat in her 5 a.m. silence. She refused to let Song Day One have that hour. She did not tell Minjun that morning. She told him that evening. She set the phone on the table between them the same way she would later set his tablet, not as accusation, as information, as, "This is what your world has done to ours. This is what managing instead of handling actually costs." Minjun looked at the photograph. When he looked up, something had changed in his face. Not the controlled, managed version of his face. Something underneath it. Something raw and unguarded that Grace recognized as the specific expression of a man who has just understood the full weight of what he has been carrying in the wrong direction. He said, "I am going to end this. Not manage it. End it." "Yes," Grace said. "You are." She called Rochelle after he left the room. "They photographed me in my own kitchen," Grace said. A silence on Rochelle's end that Grace recognized as Rochelle deciding how to hold what she was feeling. "Are you safe right now?" Rochelle asked. "Yes." "Is he handling it?" "He says he is." "Grace." Rochelle's voice was careful and direct the way it always was when she was about to say something that mattered. "If he does not handle this fully and completely, not for his business, not for his reputation, for you and those boys, you call me. I will be on a plane." "I know," Grace said. "I mean it. I know you do." If you think Song Day One made a mistake putting Grace Williams in his crosshairs, subscribe right now and hit every bell, because this woman is about to show him exactly what kind of mistake that was. Drop your city in the comments. Drop the time. And stay. Because what happens next is what everything in this story has been building toward. 2 weeks later, Rochelle met Grace for coffee at their spot on Westheimer. Rochelle was already there, studying Grace with the unfiltered attention of a woman who knew her before anything. "You've got that look," Rochelle said. "What look?" "The one your mama gets. The one that means somebody made a serious mistake." She leaned forward. "Talk." Grace talked. Rochelle listened the way only a woman who has known you since you were 21 can listen, hearing what you are not saying as clearly as what you are. When Grace finished, Rochelle sat back. "Here is what I know about you," Rochelle said. "When you decide, it's decided." "So what have you decided?" Grace thought about Elijah and Noah, about the men they were going to become, about what a boy learns from watching what happens to his mother inside his own home, about a photograph taken through a kitchen window, about standing at a mirror in a wine-colored dress. "I've decided," she said quietly, "to come back." Rochelle's face did something Grace would remember for the rest of her life. Soft and certain and sure. "There she is," she said. "Lord, I was wondering when she was coming back." Grace laughed. Properly. From somewhere real. It was the best she had felt since before the twins. She went back to work. Part-time, then full-time by the time the boys were 4 months old. She found a trainer named Simone who worked out of a studio in 3rd Ward, a black woman who specialized in postpartum bodies, not fixing them, but reclaiming what was always there. Their sessions were not about becoming smaller. They were about becoming undeniable. Grace left every one of them more herself. She was wearing her locks down again. She had bought a dress in a deep copper that Simone had called a power color. She moved through rooms differently now, not performing belonging, but owning presence. At a hospital work event, Minjun's business associate James Yoon pulled Minjun aside within earshot of Grace. "Your wife is remarkable. Half this room has been trying to get her attention all night." She did not look at Minjun's face. She turned back to her conversation. On the drive home, he reached across the center console and took her hand. She let him hold it. She looked out the window and felt the weight of his hand and thought about the bathroom and Loretta and 5 a.m. silences, and she did not move toward him. She held the distance that was entirely his own making. He felt it. Good. She was not snooping when she found it. She picked up Minjun's tablet to show Elijah a video of elephants. Elijah had been obsessed with elephants for 6 weeks, and the screen woke up to a conversation that had not been closed. She read 3 sentences, and the air left the room. The conversation was with Ji-Yun, but it was not about logistics. It was not about the day 1 arrangement. It was a message from Ji-Yun to Min-jun, time-stamped 4 days earlier, that said, "Your mother contacted my father directly last week. She offered him an extension on the arrangement in exchange for continued pressure on your household. I thought you should know what she is doing while you believe she is standing down." Grace sat very still. His mother, Mrs. Park, who called on Sundays and held the twins and made her comments dressed as concern, had gone around Min-jun, had contacted Song Dae-won directly, had extended the arrangement that was supposed to be ending, had offered Grace's household as a bargaining chip in a deal between 2 powerful people who had decided, between them, that Grace was a problem requiring a solution. The photograph through the kitchen window. The words in the bathroom. Fat. Ugly. Get back to yourself. All of it arranged. All of it connected. Not a mother-in-law with difficult opinions. A woman who had been running a campaign against Grace Williams from the moment Min-jun brought her home, and who had been willing to use organized criminals to run it. Grace put the tablet down on the coffee table. She picked up Noah. She went to the nursery and sat in the rocking chair and breathed. She counted her son's breaths. She counted her own. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She did not cry. She did not shake. She sat in the dark nursery with her son in her arms, and she thought with the specific cold clarity of a woman who has just seen the full architecture of what was built against her, and she felt something she had not expected to feel in that moment. She felt free, because now she knew. Now she had the shape of it. Now she was not fighting a shadow. She was fighting something she could see clearly and name correctly. And Grace Williams had spent her entire career defeating things she could see clearly and name correctly. She looked down at Noah's sleeping face. Her Afro-Korean boy, both worlds in his features. She thought, nobody, not Mrs. Park, not Song Dae-won, not anyone with a camera outside a kitchen window, is going to define what this child grows up watching in his own home. Nobody. She put Noah down gently. She went to the kitchen. She waited for Minjun to come home. She did not confront him. She set the tablet on the table between them and said, "Tell me everything you know about your mother and Song Dae-won. Not what you managed. Not what you contained. Everything." Minjun looked at the screen. He looked at his wife. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Something more complete than guilt. Recognition. The recognition of a man who has been carefully managing the distance between two parts of his life and has just watched that distance collapse entirely. He talked for 3 hours. Song Dae-won. The debt from the first expansion. The pressure campaign. And then, slowly, painfully, with the particular shame of a man confessing something he has known and not examined, his mother's involvement. How she had been the one who first made contact with Dae-won's people when the original debt dispute began. How she had framed it as protecting her son's business. How Minjun had told himself she had stepped back when he asked her to. How he had chosen not to ask too many questions about what stepping back actually looked like. When he finished, the kitchen was silent. Grace said, "She scripted the words for you. In the back of a car. The night before you came to my bathroom." He did not ask how she knew. "Yes. And the photograph through the kitchen window." A pause. "I didn't know about that until you told me. That was when I understood she had not stepped back at all." He looked at his hands. "I have been a coward about my mother my entire life. I managed her the same way I managed everything. Keep it contained. Keep it from colliding. Tell yourself it isn't as bad as it looks." He raised his eyes to Grace's face. "It was exactly as bad as it looked. And you paid for it." Grace said, "I am not leaving. I need you to understand that is not a gift I am giving you. It is a decision I have made for myself and my sons. What I need from you is not gratitude. I need you to stop managing your mother and start being honest about who she is and what she has done." She stood. "And I need you to call Song Dae-won tonight and end this completely. Not tomorrow. Tonight." He called. She did not listen. She went to the bedroom and she lay in the dark and she thought about what Loretta said. "You remember." That is the whole instruction. She had remembered. Completely. Down to the bone. Minjun came to bed 2 hours later. He said, "It's done." She did not ask for details. She already knew from the quality of his voice that it was true, not managed, done. She nodded. She closed her eyes. But the story was not over. Not quite. 3 days later, Mrs. Park arrived unannounced. She sat at the dinner table and held the twins, and was present in the particular way of a woman who considers her presence itself a statement. After dinner, she asked Minjun to walk with her to the car. They were outside for 22 minutes. Grace counted. When Minjun came back, his face was doing the controlled thing. He sat across from her, and Grace said, "Tell me. All of it. My mother says you have changed. That you are not the wife she expected for this family. That your priorities are not appropriate." He was quiet for a moment. Then, she said that the boys need stability and that you are too focused on your own ambitions to provide it. She used them as a pressure point, Grace. "Our sons." A pause. She said that if I cannot bring stability back to this household, she will find ways to make the current situation with the business considerably more complicated. Grace looked at her husband. "She just threatened you," Grace said. "With our children. In the driveway." "Yes." "And you came inside and told me." "Yes." "Word for word." "Word for word." "What did you say to her?" Minjun looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he said, "I told her that Grace Williams is the most extraordinary person I have ever known, and that her definition of appropriate stopped being mine the night I crossed a room at a fundraiser and introduced myself to a woman in Burgundy. I told her that the family in this apartment is the family I choose every single day. And I told her," his voice was steady but Grace could hear what was underneath it, "that if she contacts Song Dae-won or anyone connected to that situation again, or if she uses our sons as leverage against my wife one more time, she will not have access to this home, to me, or to those boys." The kitchen was completely silent. "You said that," Grace said. "I said that. To your mother." "To my mother." She looked at him for a long time. 2 words. Small and absolute. "Thank you." Not forgiveness. Not erasure. The recognition of a man who had finally, at cost, with difficulty, in the way that real things actually happen, stopped managing and started choosing. The instruction to keep doing that. Every day, something settled between them. Not resolved. Real things are not resolved cleanly, but rebuilt, with better materials, by 2 people who had chosen to stay inside the difficulty rather than manage it from a safe distance. 6 weeks later, Ji-yeon called Grace directly. She stepped out of a board meeting at Memorial Hermann to take it. Ji-yeon's voice was precise, Korean accented, carrying something that was not warmth but was human. I wanted you to know something directly, Ji-yeon said. My father has stepped back completely. Not because of pressure. Because Min-jun sat across from him and laid out, clearly, what the consequences of continued interference would be for Day One's own business interests. It was the first time in 2 years I watched my father listen rather than dictate. A pause. Your husband is a different man than the one I was managing, Mrs. Park. I thought you should know that from someone who was watching when the change happened. Grace stood in the Memorial Hermann corridor with her hands flat against her thighs. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I was in the back of that car, Ji-yeon said quietly. I heard what was prepared for you. I helped arrange things I should not have arranged. I cannot undo that. But I can make sure you have the complete picture. Another pause. You were never the problem in that marriage, Mrs. Park. You were the solution they couldn't control. There is a difference. The line went dead. Grace stood in that corridor for 3 full minutes. She thought about the bathroom mirror and the wine-colored dress. She thought about the photograph through the kitchen window. She thought about Mrs. Park's hands folded in her lap and the words that had been prepared like a weapon dressed as honesty. She thought about everything that had been constructed against her and how none of it, not a single piece of it, had actually worked. She straightened her jacket. She walked back into the boardroom. She finished the presentation. Mrs. Park called 3 weeks after Min-jun's conversation with her in the driveway. Her voice was careful in a way Grace had never heard from her before. I want to apologize, she said. I have not been respectful. I have used methods that were beneath me and beneath this family. A pause that cost something. Elijah looks like you. I noticed that recently. He has my grandmother's eyes, Grace said. She must have been beautiful. She was extraordinary, Grace said. 9 minutes. Not an erasure of 2 years of deliberate campaign. Not the beginning of warmth. A door opening in a wall that had been solid. Grace was pragmatic enough to know that doors matter even when the room behind them is still uncertain. She went back to work the following Monday, and Simone had said something in their last session that Grace kept turning over on the drive-in. They had finished their cool-down, and Simone had looked at her and said without preamble, "You're carrying it differently." Grace had said, "What do you mean?" Simone had said, "Before, you carried everything for someone else. Now you're carrying it for you. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing." Grace had stood in the parking lot of the Third Ward studio for a long time with that. She was still standing with it when she walked into Memorial Hermann, and Diane met her in the corridor and said the board had been asking about her specifically. Not about her role. About her. That was new. That landed in her chest with a force she had not expected. She went to the women's room and stood at the sink for 60 seconds and let herself feel it. Not performing gratitude. Actually feeling it. The specific warmth of being wanted for what you are rather than tolerated for what you provide. She texted Rochelle. They asked about me specifically. Just me. Rochelle texted back 4 words. Told you she's back. Grace smiled at her phone in a hospital bathroom and then straightened up and went back to work. The boys were changing daily now. Elijah had inherited Grace's curiosity. He approached everything new with an intensity that suggested he was conducting an experiment. He would stare at a mobile above his crib for so long that visitors looked at each other with concern. Grace recognized it immediately. That was her. That was Loretta. That was a Williams woman learning the world one complete observation at a time. Noah had inherited Min-jun's watchfulness. He observed before he committed, and when he finally committed, he was completely all the way in. Grace would watch him study a new toy for 5 full minutes before touching it, and when he finally reached for it, he grabbed it with both hands and did not let go. She watched them develop their natures and felt something she could only describe as cellular joy. Her AfroKorean boys. Both worlds in their faces. Both worlds in how they moved through space. Whatever she and Min-jun were still working through. This, the two of them parenting these specific, extraordinary children, was something that had not been damaged. If anything, it had been clarified, made more essential, made worth everything. Min-jun was different with the boys now. More present, less managed. She would find him on the nursery floor on Saturday mornings, Elijah in his lap, Noah attempting to climb his back, speaking to them in Korean with an ease she recognized as love expressing itself in its native language. He was giving his son something entirely his to give. She never interrupted those mornings. She would stand in the doorway for a moment, unseen, and watch. And she would think about what Loretta had said. The question was never what he did. The question was always who he chose to be. She was watching him choose, daily, in the unremarkable and essential way that choosing actually works. That did not mean the rebuilding was smooth. That is the part nobody tells you clearly enough. There were nights when Grace lay awake and felt the old anger returning. Not the clean, clarifying anger of the bathroom mirror, but the complicated, exhausting anger of a woman who still lived with the evidence of what had been done to her. Not just by Minjun's carelessness, by his mother's deliberate campaign, by a photograph taken through her kitchen window at 5 in the morning, by the specific violation of having the only hour that was entirely hers invaded by people who needed her afraid. She talked about it in therapy. Her therapist, Dr. Anita Cole, a black woman with an office off Kirby Drive and the particular gift of asking questions that felt like lights being switched on in dark rooms, listened to all of it without rushing her toward resolution. Dr. Cole said something during their 4th session that Grace wrote down and kept. Grace, healing is not linear and it is not silent. You are allowed to be angry about what was done to you at the exact same time as you are grateful for what you are building. Those are not opposite things. They are both completely true. Grace held that. On the difficult nights and the good days and all the ordinary hours in between where real life actually lives. She was not a woman performing recovery for an audience. She was a woman doing the actual unglamorous work of it, in all its nonlinear, sometimes beautiful, sometimes exhausting truth. The outside world could see the promotion coming, the copper dress, the locks falling free, the ease in how she moved. The inside knew the therapy sessions and the 3 a.m. hours and the days when the full weight of what had been constructed against her settled over her, without warning, and had to be felt all the way through before it would lift. Both were true. Both had to be true for the good things to be real. Ji-Yun's revelation had rearranged something specific in Grace's understanding of her marriage. She had known Minjun carried secrets. She had not known until the tablet. Until Ji-Yun's message to Minjun about Mrs. Park contacting Day One directly, that the full architecture of what had been built against her included his own mother operating as a participant rather than an irritant, that the words fat and ugly and get back to yourself had been delivered on instruction, prepared in the back of a car, while Grace was inside their home making dinner and believing she was safe. This should have broken something. In certain moments it did, but in the specific way that Grace examined things at 5 a.m., with the cold, honest clarity she had earned by deciding to wake up before anyone else could tell her who to be. It also explained something she had been unable to reconcile. Because the Minjun who had crossed a room in 30 seconds, who had wept at an altar without stopping the tears, who now sat on nursery floors giving his sons his language, that man had not looked at his wife 6 weeks after she delivered 2 lives and independently decided she was wrong for existing as she existed. He had been delivered his mother's script. He had read it aloud. He owned that. He knew he owned it. But the words had not come from him. They had come from a woman who had decided, years before that bathroom morning, that Grace Williams was a problem requiring a solution. And Minjun's real failure had not been the words. It had been the years of choosing to manage his mother rather than confront her, which had left a door open in their marriage that Mrs. Park had walked through all the way to Song Dae-won's office. Understanding this did not heal the wound, but it located it correctly. And locating a wound correctly is the beginning of treating it honestly. She told Minjun about this distinction one morning over coffee when the boys were with the nanny and the apartment was quiet. She told him what she had worked out. He listened the whole way through without defending himself. When she finished, he said, "I chose comfort over honesty with my mother my entire adult life. I told myself it was respect. It was cowardice. And you were the one who paid for it." He looked at his coffee cup. "I don't know how to give you back what that cost you." "You don't," Grace said simply. "You can't give it back. What you can do is make sure nothing like it is ever possible again. That is a different task, and it is the one in front of you." He looked up. "I know." "Then do it," she said. "Not for me. Because you understand now what you are actually choosing between." He understood. She could see it in his face. Not the managed version of understanding, the real kind. The kind that sits in a person and changes how they move through rooms. That was enough. Not everything. Enough to build on. The promotion came on a Thursday in spring. Vice President of Operations. Grace sat in the conference room and received it with the composure of a woman who has spent enough time earning something that its arrival lands clean. She knew it was deserved. She had done the work. That knowing, carried internally, requiring no external confirmation to be real, was itself the real promotion. The title was just the world catching up. She told Minjun at dinner. Simply, I got the promotion. He set down his chopsticks. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at the fundraiser, at the altar, on every morning of the first year when the looking was still new. Tell me everything, he said. And he meant it. All the way through. Not recalibrating. Listening. Later, after the boys were asleep, they stood on the balcony. Houston below them. That particular warmth of a Texas spring night. You know what I think about sometimes, he said. Tell me. That night at the fundraiser. The 30 seconds it took me to cross the room. I think about how close I came to not crossing. He paused. And then I think about everything that would not exist. Grace looked at the skyline, at the lights of the city that had watched her rebuild herself from the inside out. She thought about Loretta, about Rochelle's face at the coffee shop, about the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, about the photograph through the kitchen window that she had refused to let have her 5 a.m. hour, about Minjun on the phone ending it, not managing, ending. She thought about what had been built against her and the fact that it had failed, not because she had been rescued, because she had been impossible to diminish. Because a woman who has remembered who she is cannot be made to forget again by people who need her small. She reached over and took Minjun's hand. Not because she needed to hold on to him. Because she chose to. From the fullest, most complete, most undiminished version of herself. From the woman who had stood in a bathroom in a wine-colored dress and made the quietest, most powerful decision of her life without even knowing yet what she was deciding. She had not been rescued. She had remembered. And everything, every last piece of what came after, had been built on that. She was not a woman who had been saved. She was a woman who had saved herself. And she knew, completely, in her body, in the bone, the difference between the two. That knowledge did not require tending. It simply was. It had always been there. She had just needed to stand still long enough in a bathroom that smelled like lavender oil to find her way back to it. She thought about the wine-colored dress she had put on that Saturday morning, the 40 minutes she had spent doing her edges, the specific quality of hope she had worn walking to that bathroom mirror. She thought about what she had been reaching for when she turned and what she had found instead. She thought about how long she had stood at that mirror after he left, how she had squared her shoulders in the silence and gone to her sons anyway. That squaring of the shoulders, that going anyway, that had been the beginning. Not the kitchen table or the driveway conversation or Ji-Yun's call or any of the dramatic moments that a story needs to move forward. The beginning had been that one small act. A woman choosing to keep standing when standing cost something. A woman deciding, without ceremony, without anyone watching, that she was still worth showing up for. She thought about the photograph through the kitchen window. About sitting at her kitchen table at 5 a.m. and choosing to stay in that chair. Choosing not to let Song Dae-won have the 1 hour that belonged only to her. About what that refusal had cost her nothing and communicated everything. She thought about her sons in their cribs, about the men they were becoming, about what they were watching in this house every single day without knowing they were watching it. She thought about Elijah's grandmother's eyes and Noah's father's watchfulness and the particular miracle of two worlds deciding to become one small particular person. She thought about Loretta in Savannah ironing church clothes on Saturday nights and speaking in a voice that never needed to rise. She thought about Rochelle saying there, "She is the way you say it when something important comes back after being gone too long." And then she stopped thinking and simply stood on the balcony in the spring warmth of a Houston evening with her husband's hand in hers and her sons asleep inside, and the city spread below her like evidence that the world was large and full and still, even now, entirely worth being present in. She had not been rescued. She had remembered. And that knowing, that bone-deep, unshakable knowledge of who she was the thing that no one, not Mrs. Park, not Song Dae-won, not anyone with a camera outside a kitchen window, had ever actually had access to. It had been hers the whole time. Waiting. Patient. Certain. If you have been here with me from that bathroom to this balcony, if this story sent you somewhere tonight, somewhere real, somewhere you needed to go, share this right now. Not after. Now. Send it to the woman in your life who has been standing in her own bathroom too long. Send it to your daughter. Send it to your sister. Send it to anyone who needs to hear that the bravest thing is sometimes getting back in on your own terms, completely yourself, with nothing left to apologize for. Subscribe, hit every bell, and leave me a comment with your city, your time, and one thing you are choosing to remember about yourself tonight. I read every single one. I will see you there, and I will see you in the next one.